Welcome everyone to the Waiver Reimagine stakeholder engagement event on simplifying the service menu. We're so glad you could join us today, and we look forward to hearing your input. Jim, if you go to the next slide. So I'd like to start with some introductions here. The Improve Group, an evaluation firm in St. Paul, is conducting today's event. I am Carissa Propson. I'm a senior consultant at the Improve Group, and we have some other staff members with us today who will be facilitating the small group breakout sessions that we'll be having a little bit later. Those folks are Ellen Squires, Russell Barnes, Sarah Magera, and Kylie Nicholas, and you'll see those folks in the participants list. I also want to introduce Jim Nord, who is here today as our technology manager for today's event. Next slide, Jim. And I also want to introduce the staff from the Minnesota Department of Human Services Disability Services Division who are here with us today. We have Stephen Horn and Elliot Rankin here, as well as Hannah Lamb will be joining the later event on this topic. I also want to acknowledge that we'll have a Senate staffer from the Minnesota State Senate with us as an observer today. So looking forward to having everyone here to join us. Next slide, please. So now that we've started with some introductions, let's just move on to talking about some logistics and technology notes. So obviously today we'll be using Zoom. This is the main room that we'll be in for some presentations and sharing information. We'll also have some Zoom breakout rooms, and I will talk more about those later. In the large group, you can turn your video on or off by clicking the image of the camera in the bottom left corner of your screen. We will mute all microphones in the small group, in the large group, just to prevent feedback and any audio issues, but you'll be able to turn those on in the small group if you would like. You can click on the image of two people on the bottom of your screen to see the participants pane, and you can feel free to rename yourself if you would like. That would be helpful. That might be helpful later on if you feel comfortable doing so. If you need help with technology during today's event, you can chat to Jim Nord, our technology manager. You'll see him, he is the host. Or you can use the raise hand feature. Looks like a little image of a hand, a blue hand in the bottom of the participants pane. And Jim or someone else from our team will be able to help you. I also want to note that the large group portions of this meeting are being recorded, and they will be shared after the event, and the recording will be of this shared screen only. So now that we have that out of the way, let's talk about the agenda for today. So we're going to focus on obviously simplifying the service menu today, and starting with an overview of the Waiver Reimagine project. Then we'll move into some presentation and small group discussions around the simplified services. After that, we'll discuss the new service, integrated community support. That will be, again, both a presentation and a small group discussion in breakout rooms. And we'll close by talking about remote support, presentation, and small group discussion. Finally, we'll end with some information about how to stay engaged through this process. Next slide, please. The purpose of today's event is to gather more feedback that will shape how DHS carries out and communicates about Waiver Reimagine. So as such, we'll be reviewing the simplified service menu and draft policies for the CBSN. And then in small groups, we'll ask for your input on the draft definitions and policies and how they can be improved to be more clear and to help you be more prepared for these changes. So also please note that while we may be able to answer some simple questions about the information that's shared today, our intention is really to hear what your questions are and then share them back to DHS in to address in the design and implementation of these services. So with that, I will turn it over to Stephen to share an overview of Waiver Reimagine.
Welcome. Thank you so much, Carissa. I'm Stephen Horn. I work in the Disability Service Division at the Department of Human Services. I'm one of the policy leads on the Waiver Reimagine project. And we're excited that everybody is taking time today to participate in this opportunity for feedback on these important steps that we are doing to simplify our service menu for people who access services. I think to start off, we plan to watch the YouTube video that we created for this project. I believe it was also sent out in prior communication to this meeting on Friday, but recognize that everybody may not have had a chance to view it. So we take just a moment to watch this introduction from our director, Natasha Mers. Jim, are you able to click on the, perfect. Thanks.
Minnesota Department of Human Services, Disability Services Division.
Hi, I'm Natasha Mers, Director of the Disability Services Division at the Minnesota Department of Human Services. My division works with you and partners like tribes, counties, providers, and advocates across the state to ensure that you have opportunities to live the life you want in the community. Thanks for joining us. I'm excited to tell you about Waiver Reimagine. It's a project that will simplify the waiver system and give more options to you and your family. But first, let's start with some background about the waiver system. Waivers are a way to pay for home and community-based services that support you to live in the community rather than an institution. Waiver services can help you take part in community activities and support you at work. For decades, you, your family members, and many advocates have worked with the state to create a system of supports and services that focuses on home and community-based services. Your advocacy has played a vital role in making the system more person-centered and continues to inform the improvements we're making today. As the need for waiver programs grows, the service system must respond and adapt to challenges that we've heard from you, your family members, and advocates. This will ensure you can lead meaningful lives based on your own goals and what is important to you. So what is Waiver Reimagine? We've heard from you that the waiver system is too difficult to understand. You told us that you aren't getting the information you need and that the system limits your flexibility, control, and choice over services. Waiver Reimagine is designed to shift the power balance. It will make the system simpler and give you more control so that you can focus on what is important to you and important for you. Waiver Reimagine began because we heard from you, your family members, and advocates that these improvements are important. Your input will keep shaping our work like it has from the very beginning. Now, let's talk about some of the changes and what they will mean. We're starting with simplifying the waiver services menu to make services easier to understand. The system will be simpler, and you will still get the supports you need. Over the next several years, we will work with you, your family members, advocates, providers, tribes, and counties to make more improvements to the waiver programs. They will be easier to understand and give you more options, control, and flexibility to choose your services and supports. We want you to stay engaged in Waiver Reimagine. Like I mentioned, we started this work hearing from you about how you experience the waiver system. Your input has shaped Waiver Reimagine's goals and the project's course. As we move forward, your feedback is really important to us, as it always has been. We're hosting a series of online events to get feedback directly from you about different aspects of Waiver Reimagine. You can find more information and learn how to engage at the Waiver Reimagine website. We'll regularly update the page with your feedback and how we're using it. Disability Hub MN is also a great resource for you and your family. Links to both of these pages are included in the video description. Thanks for joining us. We've heard from so many of you that you're excited to share your thoughts about Waiver Reimagine. Please get involved and invite your friends and family to provide feedback too.
Waiver Reimagine, an introduction. From the Minnesota Department of Human Services, Disability Services Division.
Excellent. And it really tees up, the beginning part of what we want to be able to cover today. We recognize that these changes will be able to improve our overall waiver system so that there's more opportunities for choice and control over people's services or with people. and so that they have the right service at the right time and access based on their needs. And so these first steps, next slide, please, Jim. There are multiple phases to this project. This first phase that we're looking at is simplifying the service menu and developing an online service planning tool for people and their families to learn about the different services and the supports that are available. Those are the changes that have been approved by the state legislature, and what we are focusing on in today's feedback session is the service menu. Future changes that we are exploring are part of the second phase. So when we think about Waiver Reimagine, we really are thinking about kind of these two different steps and phases across. And then that second phase is the exploration of developing an individual budget methodology and simplifying the waivers from 4 to 2. So that's the second part of the project. The first phase is what we're focused on today, and those are the phase changes that we are anticipating to be effective January 1st of 2021. Next slide, please. So kind of where we are at, just kind of give a quick frame of reference before we dive into the service menu changes. We had a public comment period for our waiver amendments to streamline our services as part of phase 1 from July 24th through August 24th, and we received a tremendous amount of feedback. Kind of the next steps to that is consolidating the feedback that we received and then being able to submit those amendments to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, our federal partners, and then continue to make the system changes and programming changes in our IT system, updating our policy manuals and training, and continuing our stakeholder development. And in today's, the information that we provided in the pre-event, the information sent on Friday, is really about how we're communicating some of these service streamline changes in our policy manual and understanding what would be language that is best understood by the public, people who use our services, people who deliver our services and coordinate services. So that's kind of where we are at within the phase 1 of the project. Next slide. So I'll quickly walk through what the Waiver Reimagine Simplifying the Service menu looks like. Next slide. And here we see a really kind of high level overview to show what our existing services are today and what the simplifying service will be in the future. The intent of the Simplifying the Service menu is identifying services that are similar and merging them together, streamlining them together to maintain the same provider qualifications and licensing requirements into the simplified service. So when we look on the slide deck, the existing configuration, corporate foster care and supported living services corporate, the top first row on the left side, would then move to become a streamlined service or simplified service in the future called community residential services. So this entire grid kind of works left to right, row by row. And the intent is that as each service that is similar is streamlined, that the service menu becomes easier to understand. The service name is more descriptive of what types of supports might be able to be provided, and that the service is aligned based on where a person is choosing to live. So family foster care and the supported living services in a family residential setting becomes family residential services. So what people today think of as a family foster care setting or a family foster care service. And then there are 6 services that merge into one common service name with 3 different levels. So personal support and adult companion services that are available today that provide general support, supervision, and guidance would become individualized home support without training. And so there's not a training component. You're not training or enhancing and improving the skill building set of with a person, but you're providing that supervision, support, and guidance. The individualized home support without training is combining 3 different services that exist today. The independent living skills training, or what some people call ILS training, individualized home support, an existing service that's available just on BI Caddy, and then supported living services for people living in their own home on the DD waiver. So those 3 services would be combined. They have similar service scope. They combine both support and training into a single comprehensive service. And then the sixth service that would go into individualized home support is in-home family support. So this is a service that's available to adults and children who are living with family members, in which they may need training and support, along with opportunity to provide training to their family members who they're living with. And so that service becomes individualized home support with family training. And then the last existing service streaming that's occurring is day training habilitation, and the structured day service or structured day program service becomes a new service called day support services. It's combining both of those underlying service scopes into a single service that is provided to people both within a setting, but also within community spaces that we all use to promote and opportunities for people to interact in hobbies and choices of their own. Next slide, please. Additionally, there are two further changes that we're making through the waiver streamlining process, which is we've created a new service called Integrated Community Supports. It's a service that's available to adults who are living in a self-contained living unit. So they have their own sleeping space, bathroom, kitchen space, but there is some kind of connection with a provider. So the provider maybe has relationships to support some of the housing. So there's a level of provider control. Oftentimes people have thought about this as supported apartments, and there just isn't a clean service in the existing configuration of our menu. And so the development of integrated community supports fits that gap that our community partners, families, people receiving services, providers, and advocates have identified over many years. And the development of the service was with multiple stakeholders over many years to design that. And then further, to create additional flexibility in how services are received, we are adding a remote support definition that it can be globally applied to our services to provide further flexibility in the modality of how a person receives support through the experience of historical attempts to expand this option, but also in response to our COVID waivers. We've learned a lot of how and what services the delivery of remote is feasible, and we're able to, through our learnings, apply this more broadly. Just kind of checking the time. We'll go to the next slide. So these next few slides I'll be moving through rather quickly to be able to provide some space for everybody to have some small group discussions about these changes. Functionally, what we want to be able to show within these next few slides is the existing services that are being streamlined into a simplified service. They're maintaining the underlying service scope. So corporate foster care, in this situation, corporate foster care and SLS, or supported living services in a licensed residential setting, we're taking those service scopes and meshing them together and creating community residential services. We're not changing the qualifications to deliver the service. It's the same service license. We're still reutilizing the existing rate system frameworks. So that those principles that are providing what is being provided kind of move forward, but the scope of the service incorporates what was before and then adds to, enhances that option. And then within each of these slides, we have a link to our community-based service manual with a draft service page communicating more detail about what the service policy would look like in a tool that would be available for you in the future. We recognize putting a lot of that kind of content that goes into the manual into a slide deck becomes really complicated or really messy. And so being able to do a side-by-side comparison within the CBSM pages, we will have hyperlinks to the streamlined service that is being meshed together to create the new simplified service. So as we go to the next slide, this would be for the family foster care service and the supported living services for a family residential setting. It looks like we have a typo. That's my bad on that. It should say SLS in a family setting. These are providing both of these services in a corporate setting or a family setting. are providing training or habilitation, and habilitation is a requirement for the DD waiver to be able to provide, so it's providing training and or habilitation, and then the supportive residential services for adults and children. Some kind of comments remain about the underlying qualifications and licensing. Those are going to remain the same to be able to sustain current providers and new providers. Next slide, please. The new service, the simplified service, the day support services, is combining day training, habilitation, and structured day. But it was also designed with the anticipation or designed with the expectation that younger adults have different service expectations. And so some of the adult day changes that we have been making align with the movement towards the day support service, which are individual services that provide opportunities for community-based training and support to maintain and develop essential and personally enriching life skills, so people can fully access and participate in their preferred community activities and within the communities that they choose. It's incorporating the same rate methodology that we have within our existing day training and habilitation service. Next slide. Kind of switched up a little bit here for the individualized home support service. It is a service that is able to provide support and or training in 4 broad community living service categories for people who are living in their own home or their family home. And there are 3 levels to this service. Kind of referenced this a little bit earlier. The 3 levels will be individualized home support without training. So it's just providing support to the person or with the person. And then individualized home support with training. So it's combining training and support to the person. And then individualized home support with family training. The with family training is when the person who's accessing services is living with their family members in their family home, and both the person and the family are needing some support. So it's taking that what we know today as in-home family support, and it's renaming that option to align with the same service scope of individualized home support. Next slide, please. You can see this a little bit more detail, what's getting broken out and broken down, streamlined together into individualized home support without training. Because it is just doing training, it's just a support, assistance, and supervision service. It's combining what we know today as personal support and adult companion, and it will be continue to be a basic service under Minnesota Statute 245D, so your 245D license. And the rate framework is the current personal support methodology. Next slide, please. This is again kind of walking through the second level of individualized home support. This is individualized home support with training. It's provided to adults when both support and training is necessary or is needed in one or more community living service category. I recognize we haven't defined those categories at the moment. They are community participation, health, safety, and wellness, household management, and adaptive skills. So they're really broad categories and more details in the CBSM. And it's utilizing the existing framework that is used for ILS training and individualized home support, the current service, which will move into individualized home support with training. Next slide, please. As I was saying, in-home family supports then moves into and changes to a simplified service of individualized home support with family training. It's provided to adults and children when the person and their family needs support and training in their home in one of those community living service categories. And it would incorporate the existing framework that we use for in-home family services or in-home family support services. So that's really kind of quick summary of the changes. I want to kind of show that the existing services are moving into a simplified service menu structure. It's incorporating the underlying service scope and enhances and aligns to the direction of how we want to change our services. So we've taken 12 services and simplified them into 6 so that they're common across all 4 disability waivers, BI, CAT, CADI, and DD. so that and then the services also align towards where a person is living, and the level of support that they need can be very flexibly utilized within these services. And we're intentional about building off of the existing provider qualifications and not changing the underlying provider qualifications so that this transition can be more seamless and provide further clarity for people receiving services to choose the services that best meet their needs. With that, I think I will turn it back to Carissa to describe the small group activity that we have for this section.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. So as you see, it is time for a small group discussion on some of the information that was just shared. Really interested in gathering your feedback on what you've heard thus far. So the small group discussions will be held in Zoom breakout rooms. So you will be automatically moved into a breakout room along with some other event attendees and a facilitator from the improved group. That facilitator will ask you some specific questions about the services that were described. So I'll review those questions shortly. But in the small groups, you can unmute your microphone and share verbally if you'd like, or you can use the chat to type your responses. We'll spend about 35 minutes in the breakout rooms, and your facilitator will keep track of the time and let you know how much time is left. And then at the end of the breakout session, you'll be automatically moved back into this main room in the large group. Next slide, please. So as we're in breakout rooms, please keep in mind some guidelines to ensure we're able to gather useful feedback on these items in an effective and efficient way. So first, to make sure we respect everyone's input, we ask that only one person share at a time. We would like to hear from everyone in the small group, but we are, tight on time here today. So please share your input. However, feel free to skip any question. If you agree with something someone else has shared, you can just add that you agree. And to make sure that we get input from everyone in your group, your facilitator may ask someone who's sharing a lot to give others a chance to share, or your facilitator may ask someone who's not given input to share their thoughts. We'd like to allow time for each person to share, so we want to spend as much time as possible discussing your feedback on these services that were just described. And so a facilitator might ask you to pause or hold off on talking about other topics. I also want to say there are no right or wrong answers here. Everyone's ideas will be respected, and that your facilitator will be taking notes on the discussion, and those notes will focus on what was said in the group. They will not report back to DHS on who said what unless you say it's okay. We ask that you please respect everyone's privacy by not sharing with others outside of the group any kind of personal information or who said what in your breakout room. And finally, your facilitator can respond to any questions or comments you have about these guidelines that I just shared. So next slide, please. As Jim is preparing the breakout room, here are the questions that you'll be discussing. Again, your facilitator will have those questions. And I also want to note that as we're going through each of these services in the small groups, but your facilitator will be sharing these slides on the screen. But we do want to note that the review does include information that was shared in the CBSM pages. We do not have to keep the discussion just to the PowerPoint slides. So if you were able to review the CBSM pages in advance and you have feedback on those, those will be up for discussion as well. So with that, I think we're ready to move on to breakout rooms. And Jim, you can send us there. All right, it looks like we are all back. So I can turn it over to Stephen, or excuse me, to Elliot.
Hello, everyone. My name is Elliot Rankin. I work with the Disability Service Division in the Waiver Policy and Compliance team. And so I'm going to just talk to you about a new service that will be started with in January. So with the part of the changes with Waiver Reimagine is the addition of a new service called Integrated Community Supports. This is a new home and community-based service that will be available under the disability waivers. It's not replacing any current service. As such, the rate methodology is also new, and it isn't one that we currently have for an existing service. As Stephen mentioned earlier, integrated community supports has been developed over several years from input from internal and external stakeholders. And the service is anticipated to be available on the CADI and brain injury waivers beginning January 1st, 2021, and then on the DD and CAC waivers January 1st, 2023. Integrated community supports is an intensive service licensed under Minnesota Statutes 245D that provides both training and support for up to 24 hours per day to people 18 and older who live in integrated community support settings. You go to the next slide. As I said, the service is provided in integrated community support settings, which will be multifamily housing buildings, so apartment buildings, triplex, fourplex, buildings that have 3 or more units. This is a setting that needs to be approved by DHS and is owned, operated, or in some way controlled by the integrated community supports service provider. The provider might own the building, they might own or rent single units within a building, or have some other financial connection to the owner of the building. Integrated community support settings do not meet the definition of a person's own home or the definition of a residential program. And there are also limits to how many units in a building can be designated for integrated community supports, which is based on the HCBS settings rule. This information is going to be explained a lot further in the CBSM page that you have access to, and there's a link as well on the PowerPoint slide. And the scope of the service is, as I said, training and support in the covered service areas, which are community participation, health, safety and wellness, household management, and adaptive skills. So really broad categories that people can receive support and training under. And when a person is accessing service or the integrated community support settings, they do have the ability to choose where they live, who provides the services to them, and how they want to use those services. But only one integrated community supports provider is able to deliver that service in a setting. Other service providers can provide other waiver and HCBS services to people who live in the same building. But there's a difference between integrated community supports and those other service providers. So hopefully everyone's had a chance to take a look at the bulk of the CBSM page. There's quite a bit more information in there and direction on the covered service areas and the integrated community support setting, the setting capacity report, which is the methodology that providers will use to communicate with DHS to get a setting approved. And also just some other additional information about roommates and service provider choice. So I think that is all that I have to go over for integrated community supports.
Great. Thank you, Elliot. So with that, it's now time for some further small group discussion on integrated community supports. Welcome back, everyone. I think that should be our group here. Thanks for those small group discussions. And for our final piece here on remote support, I'm going to turn it over to Stephen.
Thank you, Carissa. The remote support topic is a policy that we've been working aggressively for many years to expand and utilize to create further flexibility for people to receive services and for providers to support people in the community. We have various services that incorporate concepts or aspects to a remote support delivery. And through the Waiver Reimagine project and over the last 6 months have, taken what we had learned for many years and responded to some of the temporary waivers for COVID, in response to COVID. And so this is a combination of what we have been working on for many years, and in addition to what we have received over the last several months in figuring out what we want to see our services look like moving forward. And so instead of taking each service and defining what remote delivery is within a service, we want to think about this in a broader definition that can then be applied to multiple services. And so in the next couple slides, what we'll be talking about is a remote support global definition. And when we're talking about remote support, what we're thinking about is real-time two-way communication through an enabling technology that allows for a person to receive support within an allowable service from their staff or their caregiver, who is not physically present with them, but is able to interact with them in real time, much like we are doing today. We've created a strategy to be able to have real-time communication and interaction with one another to relay information to further our work. And we can apply very similar principles to the services that we use to support people in the community and to allow them to decide how they would like to receive their services. Remote support is allowed when it's a method of support that's appropriate and chosen by the person. So this isn't necessarily a system-driven change. This is a modality choice that the person would like to have as part of their plan to say, this portion of my services, I would like support here in areas X and Y through this alternative method, because I know that I may not want a staff with me directly there at the same time. And it allows for the flexibility for a person to initiate the contact or the staff. So it can be a scheduled designed to use a remote support delivery, or it can be as needed and respond to the person within the scope of the service and document it in the person's plan. The intent is to create that flexibility that is necessary to accommodate a variety of situations that a person may experience throughout their life. Next slide, please. So when we're talking remote support, there are things that are not remote support. And it's the technology itself, the physical technology is not the remote support. That is covered under all other services. So the purchase does not fund the enabling technology. Those would be through either assistive technology, if you're on a self-directed community, consumer-directed community support or CDCS service plan, it would be within the environmental modifications, or with traditional services, the environmental accessibility adaptations or specialized supplies and equipment. So I guess to get a little bit more nuance when you're talking about what's the tool itself to provide the remote support. But when you're the modality option, the real-time two-way communication through live or through the enabling technology is that allowment of remote delivery. And then also remote support does not cover activities that are outside the scope of an allowable service. So when you look at doing remote support, if we think about it within our streamlined service menu, remote support within individualized home support would be you are doing remote support within that scope of the service. So providing remote delivery of the service to address and support maybe a community participation goal or a health and safety and wellness goal or a household management goal. So you can be checking in, coaching and guiding, providing training opportunities through remote delivery within that scope of service. Next slide, please. So we were identifying which services we were applying remote support definition to. And we're looking at the services that were impacted by the waiver streamline and some of our existing services. And components of this were built within, or looking across of what services are performed or already incorporate some of this today, what services we needed in for tomorrow, and then identifying that there are other fundamental aspects to some services that are always in person. And so we have identified a list of services that the remote delivery, the remote support delivery would be applied to. So this global definition of remote support applies to those services listed on the left side and not the services on the right side. The same information was incorporated within the public comment period for the Waiver Reimagine waiver amendments that were out from July 24th to August 24th. And I think I would be repeating myself if I went and read my notes, because I talked about them a couple slides ago. But really our goal in providing expanding the remote support definition to a global definition is to have consistency of what we expect for that modality of service across multiple services to reduce any reduce potential confusion and simplify that option. So instead of all of those services defining remote support separately, we have a broader definition of remote support that's applied to those services. And if there's any specific service limitations, they would be within a service itself and not in the global definition. And we are working on developing a policy page for this to be ready to launch for January 1st of 2021. But generally this concept is what is being built on previous services. So like 24-hour emergency assistance has historically that it is a remote delivery. But then also that over the last the pandemic. Further, you'll identify that some of the services are residential services, and those remote delivery aspects are already captured within those services and within the rate frameworks. And then other ones are unit-based services, and those will be combined. We are looking at creating ways that the remote delivery is uniquely identified, both in the service planning component and on the authorization side or claim side, that these are separate, distinct activities of both in-person and remote. It's not meshed together as one option. And the future training about some of those very detailed nuances about how this looks like in a service plan and authorization would be in future trainings that would be occurring this fall. So with that, I think I'll turn it back over to Carissa to talk about the plans for the small group discussion.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for those wonderful discussions that we've all had. It was great to hear from everyone. That concludes kind of today's event. Before we wrap up, I want to share with you how to stay engaged in this process. Jim, can you go to the next slide? So we will be hosting a series of online events like this one over the next several months through November. Please be aware that event space is limited to support facilitated conversations like we had today and to hear from everyone for a balanced perspective. But like this event, there will be a survey on the topic and all stakeholders are welcome to complete that in order to share your feedback. The schedule for the upcoming months is shown here on the slide. In September, we'll be talking about simplifying the 4 current waivers into 2. In October, there's going to be 2 somewhat different events, but both on individual budgeting. And then in November, we'll be reviewing the Waiver Reimagine 2021 legislative report. The goals for this communication and engagement work are really to ensure that stakeholders like you and people and their families have accurate information about the coming improvements to the Minnesota's disability waiver system, as well as to solicit feedback about communication, implementation of and training around these changes, and to seek buy-in from stakeholders related to these improvements. And information about Waiver Reimagine and stakeholder engagement kind of accompanying it will be shared in a variety of ways, including on video like you saw, through social media, the website, and other marketing materials. Additionally, I want to share that throughout the fall, DHS plans to provide specific trainings about the Waiver Reimagine streamlined service changes for lead agencies and providers that will get into the operational details, including service authorizations, roles and responsibilities, things like that. Next slide, please. So finally, if you'd like to learn more about Waiver Reimagine, if you have other thoughts or feedback to share, you can visit the Waiver Reimagine webpage, which is linked here. There's also information on that webpage about upcoming events. You can email DHS at waiver.reimagine@state.mn.us with any questions or input that you have about Waiver Reimagine. And finally, you can subscribe to receive the DSD list announcements on the Waiver Reimagine webpage if you have not yet done so. Next slide, please. So on behalf of the Improve Group and the Disability Services Division, thank you very much for your time and input today. We appreciate your feedback and hope you consider participating in future engagement opportunities.